All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for everyone coming tonight to Video Game Makers Unite on this Thursday evening, August the 13th. I'm John Henderson. I'll be your host this evening. And thanks everyone for showing up. More people will be coming in as the evening goes along. This will be about 2 hours long. And thanks for spending your Thursday night with us. Of all the things you could be doing, you're here in front of your computers like everyone else is doing in your own designated living spaces, avoiding the infected humans that live outdoors and uh, the toxic droplets that may be hovering in the air. But we have a short speaker series going on tonight with 3 professionals in the fields of user experience and user interface, all of whom have gainful employment working in video games, among other things, in the Austin area. We're so fortunate to have people like them who are available and willing to talk about what it is that they do. As one of the things that I like to do with this show, and by the way, this is the second total time that we've done this over Zoom. Normally we'd be downtown at the Capitol Factory taking advantage of their physical space, but we're just taking advantage of their commercial Zoom account. We thank you very much for Alex Wiesenthal and the Capitol Factory events team for making this available, as well as my partner, Gordon Walton, who is normally the guy who pays for a whole spread of beer and pizza. Hasn't had to do that in the past several months, but the company where he works and his partner at Artcraft Entertainment this week announced that their game Profile went from alpha to beta, which is quite a big deal in his space. Now MMOs can stave off saying that they're at launch status, but still be available for people to play. And we wish them the best to his team, and that's probably going to be his priority for the next several weeks at least. A couple other announcements this week, at least 2 games made in the greater Austin area launched, both indie games. Rising Stars 2 by Gilly Games is available on Steam. It's like a rock star career simulator type game. And Casey Denellen Games. Casey Denellen, having experience at Rooster Teeth Games and Certain Affinity before that, has gone to ground and made his own game about killing spiders in the most violent way possible, called Kill It With Fire. Is now available on Steam and the Epic Games Store. So please give them your business and appreciate it. Quite fun games, by the way. One thing that I would encourage everyone to do, if you're not familiar with Zoom, in the participants window, there should be an option to ask to raise your hand. And we're going to do that right now with a thing we call job haves and job have-nots. Anyone who is, we'll start with the people who are looking for work. Please identify yourself by your full name. What your aspirations are, aspirations using the old Sims term, what kind of job you're looking for, and talk about what you have to present yourself. And I will allow people one at a time to do that. Delaney, you're up. Oh, I have to unmute you too? Okay.
Hey, sorry about that. So my name is Delaney Bannon. I have experience professionally working as a Scrum Master, but I am trying to get into the game industry in some sort of development role. I like doing creative things, so I have about 4 years of experience in Unity, coding in C# with a variety of different, goals and things that I've done with it. But yeah, I'm looking to get into design or development in some way.
Thank you, Delaney.
Thanks, John.
Kat Craig, you're next.
Hi there, my name's Kat. I'm relatively new to the Austin area. I've kind of lived all over from New York to Seattle, and now I've been in Austin for about 4 years. I'm actually currently working at Dell, but my contract is actually ending in November, so I'm kind of like putting feelers out. In the UX UI space, I have over a decade of experience in that realm, and I've been fortunate to work for gaming companies such as Nintendo, Blizzard Entertainment. I've done a little bit of work for Pokemon, as well as other commercial aspects of that realm, such as Philips, Best Buy, etc. So I'm kind of like looking in the UX UI space and gaming. Gaming is my true love and it always will be. So I'm definitely kind of looking in that realm. I actually have spoken to some people at Certain Affinity before, so really cool company as well. But yeah, just really looking to kind of get back into the gaming space.
And if you have a website or any personal information, you're welcome to put it into group chat so people can save it. Thank you,
Okay.
Kat.
Thanks.
Andrew Connor.
Hey everybody, how you doing? I may have a little bit of a different story than a lot of the folks in this chat. I come from being a recording and mixing engineer. I worked in Nashville for a while, recording bands, recording music, and I'm wanting to compose music for video games. So I've been in Austin about 2 years, and that's what I'm working to do. I've got a website if anyone wants to hear some music. I know that's not really the big topic of the night. I'll throw it in the chat, but happy to be here hanging out with folks working on games.
Thank you, Andrew. Anyone else looking for work at this time? We may have some time to come back around. We're going to have a Q&A session with our speakers after they finish, but I don't see anyone raise their hands. Anyone else are wanting to talk? This may not be the season for it, but that's fine. But anyone is welcome to use the chat and post links to anything that you care to within reason. Conversely, about the job seeker, the entities looking to hire people, does anyone represent an entity, company, or themselves who is looking to hire people? Elena Woods.
Hi guys, I'm the founding designer of Fabilingua, which is it's an app for children to learn Spanish through immersive stories and interactive stories. We are looking for a Unity developer and also potentially a backend developer. So anyone with either of those experiences, I will put my email in the chat, and yeah, just reach out.
Thank you. One of our speakers, Jason.
Hi there. Yeah, we at UX is Fine are looking for senior level UX director or designer types who might be looking to freelance it as opposed to, or in between jobs looking to pick up a job kind of thing. And also we're starting up internship programs, which I know sometimes at these meetings we have folks looking to break into the industry. We'll have some UX internships. We're just piloting that program now, so probably we won't be accepting new applications for another month or so, but reach out if you want to be in that pool. And also we'll be looking for production interns. These would be obviously paid intern positions, not high salary or anything, but we pay you for your work. They're not like, come work with us for free and we totally take advantage of you or whatever. The idea would be they'd be educational, teach you a little bit about what it's like to work for a game studio or at least a game adjacent studio. And we're always looking for awesome folks to join us at those levels as well. So, yep, that's from us.
All right. Thank you, Jason. A few more people in chat who are electing not to go on mic. Dr. Cat is always available for game design consulting through mobilegamedoctor.com. Scott Porter is interested in would like to connect with artists, and he has posted his gamesbymoonlight.com website. Becky Schmader is a pretty new UX designer who has aspirations to work on games in some way, shape, or form. Check out portfolio at beckyschmader.com and also on ArtStation. But like I said, thanks for everyone who came out tonight, and there'll probably be more people as we go along. I'm basically killing time to let people wander in. We had almost 70 people sign up for this, but I don't like the idea of people just kind of wandering in and not knowing what to make of it. So thank you for putting up with me having to push little buttons, but I will do my best to make sure that we keep up with that. And I told our speakers I was going to do this. We have varying degrees of experience in our audience, which is always the case. Video games continue to be a very interesting subject for people, and who doesn't find them fascinating, whether they play them or think about them as a form of art, entertainment, or cultural touchstone as they go. The nice thing about Austin is there are many different places to work and many different histories to draw on. And I will post these as links in just a minute, but there's 3 that anyone who is interested in video games that just wants to start and learn as much as possible and just spend the time and focus on and everything they can is gamasutra.com, gamecareerguide.com, and GDC Vault. They're all owned by the same parent company, but look up for anything involving people actually finishing things. They used to call them postmortems. That's getting to be a kind of a loaded term, and not everyone wants to call it that way, and implies that putting a game out there kills it. That doesn't always happen, but there's a lot of information to get just by spending time on the internet. And I'm not discounting anyone's desire to talk to real human beings and get their insight, but the truth is any professional is going to have his or her own story to tell, and there is no plan for this. There is no straightforward, just like there is no back door, there is no shortcut. Everyone comes at this from oftentimes non-existent plans or by way of some other profession, and none of it is bad. No one is coming in it illegitimately. At least I don't think so. The only problems come about when people start conflating things that should not be necessarily married together, such as creating a form of art or entertainment and then immediately expecting to be able to sell it. Well, not only is that a different skill set entirely from actually making things creatively or technically, it's better to have someone to take that on just for the sake of your own energy. Not to say that you couldn't handle it, but usually if you find someone else who can take it over, because if you can imagine where you're at the end of a development cycle, usually you want to take some time off and not continue to chase the market. If you could hand us here, please take care of my baby, and bring it to market, bring your creation to market, and find people that will pay money and attention to it. If you can find someone else that you trust to do that, that's usually a better idea overall. So that's advice that I find myself giving to just about everyone. And I will continue to bring people in, but about 7:15, I think it's time. I'm going to turn it over to the guy who did most of the work on actually helping me corral speakers, one of whom I hadn't actually met before tonight. But we'll let him introduce Michael and Allison. And at this time, Jason Squire, take the floor.
All right, awesome. Sorry, I'll be making awkward contact as I make sure I introduce our guest speakers correctly with their bios. Hi, everyone. Yeah, definitely, as you'll learn in my talk, I've got a non-traditional intro to the games industry. For the past 19 or so years, I've led teams and provided product design and UX direction, both as a consultant and as a studio leader at Amazon, Big Huge Games, Disney, Microsoft, and Zynga. And I recently co-founded UX is Fine with Dave Inscore and Neil Edwards to provide full-service game consulting, UI, UX design and direction, and visual identity, look and feel, art direction, and production. With me tonight, I have Alison Carrier. She's a co-lead designer of Metagame and UI, UX for Certain Affinity, an independent game studio in Austin, Texas. She started in the industry as a UI artist and has taken on several roles over the years. As a seasoned developer, she is currently working on an unannounced third-person looter shooter while passionately advocating for diversity and equality and equity in video games. Thank you, Alison. And we have Michael Smith here. He is the lead UX UI designer for Zynga's Game of Thrones slot casino game based in Austin. Game of Thrones slots launched last year and has done very well, winning the EKG Slot Award for Best Social Slots Game in 2019. His career started in animation, continued into learning apps such as Rosetta Stone and Pearson, and had followed and is now entirely working in user interface for games. And just as a side note, Mike Smith and I go way, way back to 2001 when we both worked at, or 2004, I guess, when we both worked at Big Huge Games together. So, hey, Mike. So we're going to do user journeys. Each of us is going to tell a short, hopefully, tale of how we got to be where we are right now. Hopefully some of you will find this interesting. I'm going to race through some of it because when I get excited, I race through things. And I brought a lot of content that some of which I can, breeze through and we can talk about in questions and answers. We're definitely going to leave a big chunk of time for Q&A for folks. I've got some ideas about how to get things started and get the most out of our UXers. Maybe we can get them to say some controversial and interesting things that can help spark some ideas for growth in the field, or motivate you to learn something new or try something new, or maybe even explore new job opportunities. And as you'll find, we tend to think about UX fairly broadly. And so, at least from my perspective, but I'm sure from Mike and Alison's too, we value input from basically everyone. I mean, that's kind of the nature of what we do, is we take input from folks and then we figure out how to separate the wheat from the chaff. Without further ado, let me get into share screen and find the lovely PowerPoint. John, you'll give me like just a thumbs up or a thumbs down in terms of you can hear me volume wise and all that.
You're good.
All righty. Find some hotkeys that don't close Zoom. All righty. Move this over here, and then I guess if I minimize this, I'll just see John. So yeah, John, if I'm speaking too fast or something, just wave your hand and or if someone has a question and wants to interrupt, that's okay too. But just let me know. So my UX journey, let's start back at the beginning, but I'll go very quickly. I went to graduate school at University of Illinois, Chicago, and I studied judge and jury decision making, and specifically how do judges and juries make decisions when they're presented with complex scientific or probabilistic information. So think DNA evidence, like what's the probability that someone's DNA left at a crime scene could match that of another person due to chance alone or due to some sort of error in the lab. And also things like economic damages, like how do you figure out how much money someone should get for breaking their leg while falling down an escalator at a mall. A lot of that academic research went into academic papers and reference manuals for how we should present DNA evidence to jurors in criminal trials, for instance. But my main takeaway from this whole thing was the scientific method. I really, really was intrigued by finding answers to life's questions using this directed process of asking questions, doing research, testing hypotheses empirically, analyzing those data, ruling out alternative explanations, and trying to come up with the best answers possible through science. I burned out at grad school just before the PhD, as many of us are wont to do, and decided I needed to do something else. And this is a sort of discovery period for me. I took an entry-level job and was surrounded mostly by undergraduates who were about 5 or 6 years younger than me. Now, this was a generational thing. I had grown up with command prompts, and things like Windows and the Mac were actually like, they didn't exist when I first started computing. But a lot of the people that I worked with had never experienced something like, a command prompt. And so there were a lot of these fresh out of college people who were just like freaked out because they didn't know how to approach a screen like this. And me being sort of the elder statesperson there, I thought, well, I might be able to help. And ASCII art was kind of big at the time. Maybe it is still big. I don't know. These were the things that people did before emojis became a thing on phones and all that sort of stuff. And so I found a bunch of Calvin and Hobbes ASCII art, and I made just like forms for people that looked friendly. Like Calvin would ask you, like, what's the date range you need for your report or whatever? And then it would generate the job control language that would run the job. And I sort of gave personality and like a feeling of like comfort to the software. And I had no idea that this was a thing. I didn't know that user interface design was actually a thing, but I found out. And then I started looking around because I'm like, well, what else could I do like user interface wise? And in one of the companies that I taught statistical software, it's called SPSS in grad school, and I'd used it extensively. And they were located in Chicago as well. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to have a job there because they are in the Sears Tower and all sorts of stuff. But they were looking for a senior user interface designer, and I wasn't a senior user interface designer. So I saw month after month pass and they never filled it. So I just emailed them and said, look, if you're looking for a junior person, and they hired me. So the exciting stuff I did there is the stuff on the right-hand side of the screen. Lots of statistical stuff, lots of Windows dialogues that are really boring and complex learning with a really interesting user base that didn't like things to change, even if they were quite broken or pretty much, unable for any normal person to parse. And so that was my life for a little while. At the time, I'd sort of, still played games and such. And, Half-Life was big a little bit before this time, like just a year or two before this time. Planescape Torment definitely dominated a lot of my playtime. And Dungeon Siege was just about to come out. This was like late 2000, early 2001, and I was super psyched about that. And because I was so excited, I mentioned to my boss and anyone who would listen, maybe we can learn from games who are like, make a habit of, of displaying complex information to users in interesting ways. And maybe we can learn from no. Like the universal thing I heard was, no, don't bother, waste of time. We can't learn anything from games. So I was sort of dejected for a bit, but then fate intervened. And they decided that they would send me to SIGCHI, so the major computer-human interaction conference in Seattle in 2001, where Microsoft had a social booth offering free beer, so I went. And at that event, they had 2 people demoing an early build of Dungeon Siege, and I walked over to play this, and I talked to 2 other grad school dropouts like myself, who had dropped out of grad school because they burned out, and now they were working at Microsoft Game Studios making games by applying user experience research to game development. Needless to say, I took the recruiter's call, flew out to Microsoft, and that fall I was at the Microsoft Games User Research Playtest Labs applying scientific method to game development. And we brought lots of people in, we observed them, we had them fill out surveys, and we try to help teams make their games suck less for the most part. We would like to, on a good day, say we made them more fun or better, but generally speaking, we help take the suck edge off of them. And what was interesting, one of the key things I learned there, when I look at this screen here, this is Rise of Nations, one of the games that I worked on, one of the first games I worked on. You look at this, and then you look at that sort of widget from SPSS, the software widget, and it's like, there's nothing wrong with complex data and stuff. In fact, like a lot of, the hardcore appeal to these games is the consumption of data and making optimal decisions. The problem isn't this, and we can certainly work on refining the UI here. I mean, sure, there's improvements we could do here. But the problem was that this should be fun to learn. Like, while I might not be able to parse this screen at first glance, this is a screen that I can parse at first glance. Like, there's not as much going on, and I can investigate. And as it turns out, computers are great at running these simulations that provide feedback to you. And so if we actually structure an environment and an encounter, and we have a sequence of them together that are well balanced with a sense of progression, we can actually teach you like a really complicated thing through fun gameplay. And that became a thing for me. That became like, UX isn't just about, or at that time really UI isn't about just making it easier to parse a widget. It's about how do you get people to have fun while figuring out like the complexities of a system. And it didn't just apply to strategy games, right? This is Crimson Skies, the second game I worked on. obviously as an action adventure game, you know, and it's going to be really, we can't have all these detailed widgets and HUD elements, right? Because people aren't going to be focusing on them. They're going to be focused on the action. But even though we simplified these widgets on the screen, the mini map and the health meter and turbo meter, ammo, in a dogfight, people still didn't realize, like, if they went below half health. And so we had to work with game designers on, you know, oh, well, when you go below half health, your engine catches fire for a few seconds and chunks fall off your wing, right? And so this is, you hear UX folks talk about this all the time, but like how UX is not just UI. And really, you know, I take a very holistic view, right? That engine exploding is more important to me than knowing the half gauge is. Eventually I can learn that the gauge is half full when that engine explodes. But really, it's like you're in a dogfight and you're going to die if you don't change your tactics. That was all cool. I loved working in the games industry with game developers, but I really wanted to make games. And so Big Huge Games, the folks who made Rise of Nations, that I did all their usability and user research for, decided they wanted to take a chance on me. And they brought me out there to help them make games in a production role. They knew that I could work with their talented folks, get them to make really cool experiences in games, and figured I could plug in nicely. I kind of figured that it would be, you know, a chance for me to learn on the job, like get paid to learn how to make games, what could be better. You know, there'd be a checklist of things that you did, you learn them, and then you made awesome games, right? And, you know, those of us who worked in game development know that that's really not what happens when you're making games. And the production role, actually what happened was I was doing a lot of this. You're working with a really high performance, very talented group of individuals who all have different motivations, and you're trying to just like steer the ship. As it turns out, I could do a reasonable job of that, but it like broke my will to live. So I shipped a few games as producer, but then I settled back into like what my real passion was. And this is me and Brian Reynolds here using our own homegrown usability lab. And this is where I helped design the core controls, onboarding experience, and stuff for Catan for Xbox Live, and as well helped them pitch before I left the Crucible, which became the RPG known as Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. I was back in my happy spot though at the user experience side, just working with folks trying to help them make awesome games. So I had to get out of games though, because like at grad school when I burned out on games, and I joined Amazon. Not that Amazon. This was back in 2007 before Amazon was making games. I joined their community division, and basically what we were interested in is how do we help people make better purchasing decisions by consuming user data? So star ratings, customer reviews, those sorts of things. What kinds of ways do we present these data to people so they feel confident in hitting that buy now button? Of course, one of the key components to that is, well, how do we get people to do our work for free, right? We need all these review data in there. And so how do we think about the pipeline of people, you know, getting them into the flow of leaving star ratings, uploading photos and videos, writing them out. And as it turns out, you know, they figured out quickly that, you know, leaderboards are an effective way to motivate folks. And obviously, you know, we see, you know, leaderboards driving competitive behavior in games too. But this really taught me a lot about, you know, the whole idea of in social computing, how do you get people to be involved enough to basically do stuff for free for you and do your work for you for free. But like the lure of games was just too strong, and I wanted to get back into it, but I kind of wanted to do it on my own terms. So the next little bit is just going to talk about some of my consulting and then my work at Zynga and Disney, but I'm going to talk about it sort of, you know, pretty briefly. I was trying to figure out what to do, and really, you know, I was sort of like the wolf pack of one at this point. It was just me. You know, I'd saved up some money because I worked at Amazon. I didn't have many bills, so I thought, well, what could I do? Well, I could do the games user research for companies that weren't Microsoft games, because a lot of the big publishers hadn't yet built out their user testing capacities. And so as it turned out, like Activision, EA, BioWare, Microsoft, even Microsoft, non-core Microsoft, but Microsoft publishing other games from other publishers and developers, had needs for user testing. And it was really for them risk mitigation, right? If you're going to spend 10 to 50 to $100 million on a franchise, you might as well find out if it sucks or not and try to fix that kind of thing. And so that was, there was definitely work for me to do that there, and just go in and parachute in and help these teams by doing their user research. But at the same time, Facebook games were growing. And so we have like Frontierville here and Mafia Wars. And a lot of the same concerns there, like how do you get people into the game, make it super accessible. But there's also this, how do you make people do work for free? Like all the marketing that, we all remember Facebook circa 2011 and 12, like what that looked like. So-and-so needs 4 more nails in your feed or whatever. How do we motivate people and make it easy for people to do that kind of viral spammage that we need to make these games succeed? And so there was definitely a role for me to do consulting there. And I at this point, I've made a choice. I was trying to decide whether to go back into sort of the AAA space and join a company working on console and MMO games, or to go to stick with the free-to-play that seemed to be the new hot craziness. And I decided to go for the new hot craziness, and it was probably a good choice because the alternative was 38 Studios' job, which that's a whole other kind of talk, I guess, that someone can do. So I joined Zynga full time and learned a lot about free-to-play games and what it takes to make them succeed. Things like, how do we make sure that the top of funnel is optimized so that we can get as many people as possible into the game and as far as possible in the game so that they want to return? How do we get them to send the viral components that we need them to send? How do we get them to know that more content is coming that they want to consume and maybe pay some money to help speed things along? And I worked with various franchises, helping them launch their games. And that was fun, like working with the new IP and all that sort of stuff. Where it got less fun was working on the live products, the games as a service, because Zynga was reasonably short-termed in terms of how they like to turn those things out, as it were. And it meant that UX really took second, third, or fourth seat to things like product management, which was focused on, how much profit could we make this quarter as opposed to long term. And so it became kind of demoralizing. This is a screenshot from Cityville 2. Cityville 2 was the game that killed Zynga Baltimore, even after a successful run with Frontierville and such. But yeah, that was a big, bad failure. They closed the studio. I jettisoned out with days to spare to go to a free-to-play Disney company. I was located here in Austin, working with Austin folks who'd actually been shut down by Zynga as well. And that's how I'd met them. And so I got a chance to learn the free-to-play mobile market. And then they shut us down too because that game failed. And then I was left wondering what to do next. I was no longer a wolf pack of one. I had a wolf wife and some wolf cubs. I also didn't want to leave Austin. I really liked it. Didn't want to move out to the West Coast for a game, publisher job or what have you. And also the landscape had changed in terms of what kind of work was available for freelancers. A lot of the studios and publishers that I'd worked with before doing freelance user research had stocked up over the, they realized the value of it and they'd hired full-time folks to work there. And so they didn't really have a need. And whatever need they had for capacity needs was really being well serviced by a company like Player Research, who really just did top-notch and does top-notch turnkey user research solution for big players. And really, I wasn't necessarily interested in doing research anymore. I just wanted to make great games. And so when I let my friends know that, I was leaving Disney because they were shutting us down, some of my friends asked to consult on their games and, like, hey, our game kind of sucks, or I'm handing it to my friends. They're not having fun. Can you help us figure out what's going on? And so that was interesting. I did some small jobs there, but what started to change was folks, instead of like, game designers and directors coming to me, I would get CEOs coming to me saying, hey, we've got a game out there in soft launch and the metrics aren't looking good. Our funnel is terrible. People aren't getting through the onboarding experience. They're not returning day one. They're returning, but they're not spending any money, or they're not engaging in the features that we think they should really like and engage with. And they came at it from a very business perspective, a very business-focused perspective with the numbers. And I'm like, well, yeah, that stuff is all related to user experience, because you need to have a healthy and successful game. You need to have them engaging with your core gameplay. They need to understand the controls, how the feedback is letting them know whether they're being successful or not. There's all sorts of technical aspects to it, like load times and performance and responsibility. And then there's the UI and the interaction design and those sorts of things too. And these are all things I can help you with and help you suss out. Because when you've got a game that's live and you're spending money on it every day, and there's a million things you can do, you really need to decide quickly what are the few things that you can do that really move the needle. And so that's where I really help teams, is focus on what are the things that can move the needle in the shortest amount of time. And then from that flowed other demands like, hey, we don't have a UX or a UI designer. Can you help us mentor some of our folks to get them better at that so we can do that? Or from publishers, it's like, hey, we don't have enough bandwidth to help our developers, and some of them have really fun games, but they're totally struggling at onboarding or at core combat or at X, Y, and Z. Can you go in and help them? Because we know that's all related to the core loop, which if the core loop doesn't work, we don't get engagement, we don't get retention, we don't get monetization. And so that was a really interesting experience. And that started about 5 years ago, and up until about a couple of years, I was doing just that. But there's more because, and I'll wrap up here, sorry, Mike and Alison, but I'll wrap up here in just a moment. There is more. The clients that I worked with wanted a lot more out of me, and I left them often, with only, they were satisfied with what I'd given them, but they wanted more. I wasn't able to close the entire loop there, because sometimes instead of just direction, what they wanted was people to actually just like, okay, we know we've got a problem with this. Could you just wireframe the whole darn thing for us, or give us a bunch of high quality mock-ups that we could just implement pixel for pixel, so that we can just do it and be done with it? And I'd be like, I would love to, but I suck at both of those types of things. And you'd be foolish to pay me money to do those things. And so I was leaving a bunch of opportunity, off the table. As well, there were folks who were just like, okay, like we totally get how to make this usable, but like we want it to be cool. And I'm like, yeah, I know cool when I see it, but I am not an art director, so I can't help you with that either. And then in the free-to-play, there are all sorts of experimental games out there that are doing well, that all they need is a little brand and marketing, like maybe give them some IP and some marketing funds, and they'll probably be huge smash hits. Well, but it takes someone with an artistic background to figure out, how do I rebrand this game of this type into something that's more accessible or would fit a different type of end user in terms of how engaging the IP was. And I certainly could not do that. Teamwork. Well, I decided I needed to add people. And so I formed UX is Fine with 2 co-founders. And right now, and this is my final slide, right now it is myself and my 2 co-founders. I'm the chief consultant, and I've got Neil, who is in charge of game and UX direction, Dave, who's in charge of art and art direction. And we've been slowly kind of growing. We keep a bunch of UX designers busy. We keep a bunch of artists and animators and conceptors busy. And we're hoping to grow some of these more senior roles. Some of our other folks will move into director roles, but we're looking to expand and grow that. We even have to think about strategy now and operations and those sorts of things. And as I mentioned at the front part of the talk, we're definitely looking to onboard UX and production interns. And that's kind of my story. Oh, I can't hear John. You're on mute, just so you know.
Yeah, so again, I've only done this once before, folks. Let's introduce our next speaker. How about that? Or she
All
can.
right. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Alison Carrier, and I am a code lead designer right now, like they said, at Certain Affinity. My background is in UX UI, and I have also taken on systems work as well throughout my years. So I will go ahead and start my little presentation. So my journey, I feel like, is probably the most straightforward into UI UX. I started by going to college, and I was going to major in graphic design and web development. So this was the early 2000s. I did this at a college that was in Nashville, Tennessee, because my whole thought was, I want to create things for musicians. Like, I wanted to create album artwork and their website and their branding and all those sorts of things. While I was doing this degree, though, I was introduced to something called HCI, which was human computer interaction back then. And that feeds into a lot of human factors psychology and interaction design and user experience. While I was doing HCI courses at my college, this is where I ended up falling in love with user testing and user research. And I didn't quite know how that would fit into my, my career overall. I still had this notion like I was going to go work at a big branding house, and that's why I was doing graphic design. But my first job in advertising kind of killed that for me. I was designing a whole lot of liquor labels and so the Jack Daniel's honey, if you've ever drunk that, I helped create that label. But we also did like a lot of wine stores and liquor distribution. I had a lot of events that I had to run and do branding for. And then also build websites and mobile apps for all of these people as well. I was in advertising for about 2 years and got burnt out really, really fast and really hard. This was a very intense job that would require me to do things like build a website in 24 hours. Here's a pizza, be in your office and go. This was not conducive of a lifestyle for me. Even out of college, like this amount of hours ended up really burning me, especially for the below entry level pay that I was also getting. So I quit this to become a contract / freelance UI and web developer. And I worked on some software doing like PHP, HTML, and CSS. And during this time, I ended up getting half laid off, half fired. They were getting rid of people anyway, and they were saying that I wasn't doing as much of the work as they wanted me to because they wanted me to be a full-time engineer, and I was not. So that was a fun conversation. They took me to a park and they sat me down on a park bench and they told me to my face that I no longer had a job, and he cried, and it was very awkward. I did not enjoy that conversation, and it's not a fun time in my life because what it led to was part of the 2011 recession. This was a ricochet effect based on the 2009 recession, and I was unemployed for about 7 months. And I was collecting unemployment checks. I could not find a job in Nashville, Tennessee. There were no design jobs that were ever being posted. Web development jobs required at least 10 years experience, and I did not have that. So I had to spend a lot of time by myself doing some soul searching and trying to figure out exactly what my next move would be. I was killing myself to try and get through all of these job applications for an advertising job, which I knew was going to burn me out again. I knew I wouldn't be there for more than a year. And I thought, why am I doing this? I had a quarter life crisis essentially, and said, no, I want to be around people who I can call my friends at work, who get excited with me when a new language comes out that I could actually talk about. HTML5 was being developed during this time. I got very excited about it at the advertising company, and everybody just gave me dead stares. And I was like, but you're gonna be able to embed, videos really well. We won't have to use Flash. No, they didn't care. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where my skill set could actually transfer into the video game industry. And it started to line up one-to-one with UI art. So I could create vector art, I could create pixel art in Photoshop. I knew enough coding languages that depending on what program they were going to use, I would be able to get into that. And so I specifically targeted mobile games and video game and made my portfolio for that. I applied to 2 different jobs and I got one of them. And it was at this place called EA North Carolina. So they were transitioning to mobile. They used to be an offshoot of Tiburon and had made NASCAR go-kart racing for the NDS and the 3DS, and they had made MMA and worked on that with Tiburon. but they were transitioning to mobile. And so they hired me to be the sole UI person. I learned Objective-C, I did the coding, I did the animations, I did the art, I did the design, I did everything for that game for UI. And it was called Monopoly Hotels. So that was my first real game, and it was actually the first profitable mobile game at EA. I made a feature there that made over $1 million in a day, and it was probably the craziest thing that I've ever had a PM come scream at me, since then. This was a popular enough game that Hasbro ended up making a board game based off our video game that was based off of their board game. So it came full circle, and it was really, really cool to see. Although this game was actually not very, very fun and did not sell very well. The regular Monopoly keeps selling out. So then I got to start working on a different game for this company. Monopoly Hotels was a live service. We sent it off to another studio for them to maintain once it got to like year 2. And then when we were working on a prototype for our next game, which was a town builder, I ended up getting laid off. So you're gonna see this now as a theme. Getting laid off in games is very, very commonplace. This actually also coincided with a studio shutdown. So my studio and my job were all gone in the span of a day. But EA said, we will relocate you to Mythic Entertainment. So I packed up everything from North Carolina. I moved up to Virginia, right outside of DC, and I worked again for EA. This is when EA owned Mythic. They bought them out in 2007, so this was about 2013 when I went there. And they were also transitioning to mobile. So Mythic Entertainment, if you don't know, they worked on like Dark Age of Camelot, they worked on Warhammer Online, they worked on Ultima Forever. So I came in to help them work on Dungeon Keeper Mobile, and then a lot of prototyping initiatives as well. We were working on something that was really, really cool and was going to be branded with one of EA's IPs. But as you can guess, I ended up getting laid off. The studio shut down and Mythic was no more. So this happened in 2014. Yes, I was less than a year there, and I took my laid off curse to Mythic with me, and I feel terrible to this day. Still very guilty about that. Although a lot of my Mythic crew, they are very, very loving, and we still are in touch with one another despite the fact that it's been over 6 years since this happened. So about 9 of the Mythic people were asked to move to Austin and start up a new studio here for EA Mobile as well. So I continued to work for EA. And yes, I had other job offers and I had other things that I could consider, but this seemed to be the most interesting one that I was offered. And I wanted to get out of the DC area. That place was not for me, and I had always had my sights kind of set on Austin, so I liked the opportunity and I came here. Now I got to work on The Simpsons Tapped Out. They were already launching when I first arrived, but they had never heard of UX design whatsoever. And so I came there to be the UX lead on that project and kind of tell them, or at least corral the game designers from events to events to events, because we were essentially creating DLCs and none of them had any connection with one another. And if you don't know, like if you introduce something new to someone, they might not learn it. And so game designers were getting frustrated why people would churn out of their games and not necessarily engage with all of their content. So I came on board to do that. Well, after we worked on that for a little while, I was then transferred to a different team that started prototyping a brand new game. And it was going to be a really cool like mobile role-playing game. But as my career has gone, that game got canceled after about a year. And then we actually went back to working on The Simpsons Tapped Out. My role ended up shifting on this. I ended up becoming a game designer because my lead designer at the time told me UX design isn't real design. And so I took on the moniker of game design. I created this event. This was the only one that I launched in the Simpsons universe, but it is pretty cool to be able to say that I have written stuff that is now canon in the Simpsons universe. This game, if you didn't know, is considered entirely canon, which is really weird because we've done some weird stuff and weird storylines in here. But I got to write for it and work with the Simpsons writers on it. And it was a very interesting time, but I knew that I wanted to make the shift to AAA, or at least try to work on console and PC stuff. So that's what led me to Certain Affinity. I am still here at this company, and it's been almost 3 years now. But I am currently working on a unannounced PvE, like 4-person co-op looter shooter game that's with a franchised IP. But one of the reasons why I was able to make this switch is because it's going to be a free-to-play game, and they knew that UX was going to be a very integral part of making this product successful and ensuring that we understand customers and being able to get them in through there. But here's the thing. So games UX design throughout the entire history that I've had within games isn't really UX design. Like if you go to the app industry, if you go to a product industry, if you go to, creating usable things that people interact with every day, like your grocery store checkout, you're going to see a much more streamlined process happen where the UX designer is kind of the product owner and the one that creates the features and moves it along this sort of path that just looks super nice and clean. However, my experience with games UX has been more like this. This is essentially me always trying to fight for specific things against all sorts of either producers, against product managers, against game designers, against engineers. Like there has never been, at least in my viewpoint or my purview is what I would say, that has had a successful full integration of UX into their culture. It's still so brand new that a lot of people don't know how they want to use UX designers. And then when they do, there's a lot of people who still maintain the old adage that, we've been making games without UX designers for this long. Why do we need them now? And so every time I start at a new studio, it's a lot of educational process onto what UX can provide and what it can actually do to make the game better. So my first studio, I was doing, like UI style, biz dev, UI implementation, the coding, etc., and some game design. My second studio, I started doing more wireframes, flowcharts, prototypes, because the games were getting larger and I was trying to get them to understand much more holistically what was going on with the user flow, but alongside some UI biz dev and UI implementation. But then it starts to get a little bit bigger and a little bit chunkier, depending on what budgets you kind of have, or if you have other resources at your studios. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes I have been the lone UI UX person, and so I have had to do everything from the beginning to the end. So from concept to completion and QA testing. The big things that start a project are user surveys, user interviews, and personas. And while I can do those and know that I can produce pretty good results with that, there are always going to be holes and biases in what I produce because I am a singular person, and it's always better to have multiple points of data when you start. But right now, this is more of what my job looks like. It goes from wireframes to flowcharts, to UI implementation, to surveys, to interviews, to personas, to user journey mapping, which is a picture of what I've done in the back. That's my Zoom background. So I have Post-it notes everywhere. That is the tool of a UX designer. We do user journey maps. I do competitive analysis of games, game design, user test authoring, moderating, and compiling. Like UI UX design will always depend on what sort of resources you have at your studio and what they expect you to do. because I have been one of the first ones at Certain Affinity to really, herald and champion UX, I am the one that has been building all of the external playtesting and getting an external playtest lab there and running these tests and being able to do all that. And it is a lot of work, but it is so worth it because over time, I have started to see people start to talk more about the players than they have themselves. And it's always important for a UX designer to maintain different perspectives in order to know that they are designing for a multitude of people and never for themselves. And so I say, just make sure that you adapt your processes to fit your audience. Anytime you go to a studio and they say, we do have user research, you say, great, I will use that. I will utilize it in every way I can. And I am going to do these things with it. And hopefully you can still just be a UX designer. But sometimes you're going to have to be a UX researcher on top of that. Sometimes you're going to have to be a UI designer and do biz dev. It's all where you want to put your skill tree and your skill points into. I have done both sides of it and can tell you which ones I like, which ones I don't. But it is something that I think is both a specialist type of design and a generalist type of design too, depending on how you want to go. And that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Allison. As I've been telling people in chat, we have one more speaker, and then we'll be going to a quick break, and we'll come back with your questions and their answers. But our final speaker of the evening, Michael Smith.
Hello. Let me share my screen. All right. My name is Michael Smith. Everyone calls me Smitty. There's a ton of Michaels everywhere I have worked. And so this works the best. So they even changed my email to Smitty Smith at my job. I want to tell you about my first day in the game industry and why I was fired. I want to share with you how that experience shaped the rest of my career and led me to believe we should always strive to learn, adapt, and take unexpected opportunities. This starts with embracing non-traditional experiences, as well as finding value in the cross-pollination of ideas between the tech industry, which I've done a bit of, and games. I find that having teams with diverse backgrounds and interests is a benefit. It allows you to look around the problem space from different angles. And I think, having people who are new to games or fresh to a certain style of game helps you to come at it from with fresh eyes. So, let's see. Currently, as you all know, I'm the lead UX UI designer at Zynga, and what that means is sometimes I'm about a 60-40 split of a bit of management and a bit of hands-on doing the work. Let's see, but let me back up. As Jason said, the game's doing pretty well right now. It's my first time ever working on a slots game. I've worked on a bunch of different games, but this is my first ever casino game. So it was a lot to learn when I started. But it's been a ton of fun. We're doing really well. And our users seem to love it. I think they love Game of Thrones more than just the title and the theme really works. We've been able to get people to play slot games that typically don't, just because of it's a Game of Thrones game. So that's been really cool to see. But let me let's back up and let me tell you why I was fired. So my first day, I went to school for traditional animation at the Art Institute of Philadelphia. I interned at MTV in New York, working on Daria. Even got a couple, some of my work in some of the episodes. And then after school, I got a job at a sign company doing graphic art. My heart was still in animation, so I applied to the local gaming company that had a listing for an entry-level animator. I got the job, and on my first day, when I came in to meet the team, I got a big surprise. The previous position I was hired for would use Animator Pro. It's like a 2D paint software that's, I don't think it's around anymore. But the company had a new director, and they were moving away from sprite-based games. And I needed to know how to animate in 3D, which I didn't learn in college. They re-interviewed me that day, gave me a software test in 3D, which I failed miserably, and then they sent me home. And about a month later, out of nowhere, they called me back and offered me a chance to get the job if I could learn the software in 2 weeks. I did, and that started my 20+ career in games. I worked on a lot of titles as a game artist and animator in my first half of my career. And when I started, being a game artist meant you could get called to animate or model or do textures or sometimes all three. But as the industry evolved, so did the labor, and companies were looking for specialists. And in those early years, I leaned into the first part of my motto, which is learn and adapt. So, you know, this led me to learn Flash, to work on, when we had new games we were launching, to work on those websites, or to take on an editing task for a game trailer or a title sequence in Premiere or After Effects, if we were short on staff. But it made me well-rounded, but the drawback was I wasn't specializing on a particular track. And, you know, a jack of all trades, master of none has a bunch of benefits, but as the game industry evolved, it had a ton of liabilities, and sort of the job opportunities started to dry up. So in 2008, the last part of my motto paid off, which is take unexpected opportunities. I was working as a contractor making game models and textures for a third-party game company called Liquid Development. When I saw a local listing as a game artist at a language learning company, Rosetta Stone, I went in and had a brainstorming session, which I never did before. And I was so impressed with the team that I went home and turned our talk into an interactive prototype using Flash, something I had learned years before making websites. Later, I find that they listed the position two ways. One way was for a game artist, and the other was solely for a UX based position. They were not sure which skill set would best fit the R&D role that they were looking to fill. But my prototype got me the gig, and soon I transitioned from making just game art for the language software to doing more traditional interaction design and UX tasks. This is where I fell in love with UX. You know, things I learned years ago at my sign company about layouts and fonts and colors were explained to like why they worked. And I learned behavioral things like cognitive load and active versus passive motivation, and how data fuels why you should make a button one color over the other. Not only that, but the skills I picked up over the years were all applicable. Animation, 3D modeling, print design, they're all things I got to use, and I'm an artist at heart, so that was awesome. But learning that the UX side of that was just opened my eyes so much. I worked in a R&D pod, and so we had an a full-time UX researcher. We had a full-time UX marketing. We had subject matter experts. And so I learned so much and was able to learn not only the methodologies and sort of the process of what makes a good user experience and how to create it and how to generate it and how to come to conclusions, how to make great hypotheses on why something would work and then test it to make sure it works. But it just was a good experience in terms of flexing a lot of the skill sets that that I had come to learn. So over the next several years, I worked at game companies, tech companies, sometimes doing UX work solely, just working on with user interviews and holding design parties and organizing feature sets and flows. And sometimes I made 3D UI for VR games in Unreal, or for PC games. I made a VR game for the Oculus Mobile. I find that even when just making UI art, I still lean heavily on UX best practices and methodologies. I like to quickly iterate, and then I try and find patterns and forms that I can reuse to create a less cognitive dissonance for the user, creating less for the users to have to relearn. So in summary, my hope is that I can inspire you all to try and carve out some time to try something new, maybe just along your journey. I've been learning Blender myself on the side, but because you never know when you might use it, you know, picking up Balsamic or Miro or some other software that might apply to UX or UI, or just learning, you know, taking a LinkedIn learning class on typesetting could be very useful. Be flexible and adaptable. The industry has changed a lot in 20 years. Major changes throughout my time in the industry, and it's going to continue to do so more rapidly than we expect in the future. Take unexpected opportunities. Sometimes moving out of your comfort zone is the best cure for reigniting your creativity. I found that time and time again, that like the Rosetta Stone job, it opened up a lot of doors, and I think it's served me really well in the past. So that's all I got.
All right, thanks, Michael. Smitty. So we have come to the midpoint in our presentations. I'm going to press pause, but take note of your favorite timepiece. I have 8:10 on my Windows clock, and we'll come back at 8:20 with some Q&A. Thank you. All right, we are back with our speakers, and we're going to go into the questions and their answers, but I did want to underline the whole idea behind this talk. And one thing to point out is that having only 2 hours to do a whole talk is not a lot. And the truth is, what could be said about you know, the depth of experience that these three people have, that we could go on for a day if we wanted to. They could go into full-on lectures, but it would honestly be quite difficult for anyone to hold their attention for that length of time. But the truth is, that's not the point. The idea is that we can give people 10 to 15 minutes, and then y'all can go off and find, you know, your own bits of insight and inspiration to go on from there. But again, just to point out the obvious, if we didn't have people who are willing and able to do this, with us, then we couldn't do it at all. So thanks to our speakers for participating once more time. But we've had some people with their hands up for a bit, so I'm going to ask them one at a time. Kat?
Awesome. Thanks for taking my questions. I do have three, but I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll start with one. When it comes to user testing, do any of you like outsource? Is it done in-house? Do you perform iterative testing? And then at one point, do you make design decisions that may go against what the marketing team wants and needs, but tested really well with users?
Ooh, those are all good questions. I mean, at least in my experience, it has depended on what the budget is. So it is super hard if you aren't at the very beginning of a project to fight for a UX budget once it's been going for 2 or 3 years. So for me, when I've been able to be at the start, I can say, hey, I'm going to need at least this much money because I want to outsource it to people. I want to do the iterative testing. I want to make sure that we can have proper task analysis. And once that has occurred, you know, like we hit the success baseline that we have set for it. But usually that budget does not exist. So in games, most of the time I have to do very ad hoc tests where I am the author, the moderator, and then the person who writes the action plan afterwards. And then usually I'm the one who consumes that and says, okay, well, I saw this happen, so I will integrate it into my design. But when it comes to the marketing and user research coming together, for me, marketing has always been talking about demographics less than ethnographic information. And they usually don't have anything to do with like the actual internal validation of your game mechanics. I see them come in when it comes to like user acquisition, or, you know, where are we going to spend our marketing dollars on which platforms and to what audiences. And so I have not had a lot of overlap, although there could be, but I haven't seen a lot.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
So for Zynga, we so it's sort of similar. So we have we call them bold beats. So because it's a sort of game as a service, it's our games rely on releases and customer engagement features that kind of keep people playing. If we have what we call a bold beat, which will take, you know, maybe months or quarters to finish, we'll do some user testing, and a lot of times we'll do that. A third party will do that, and for us, the UX team, like a past one we did, we created a pet dragon feature. So we did a bunch of prototyping. We used Axure to do some click-through interactive prototyping, and then we first sent some mock-ups, just static mock-ups, to a VIP group and did a survey, and that was done in-house. And then we, just to kind of get some ideas of what people thought about the idea, and then we sort of an informal user test, I guess. And then we had a more formal sort of click-through process where we had a third party go through our prototype and, you know, and quiz people and ask questions. And we as a team will construct questions and, you know, if we were looking for answers to certain problems that we couldn't solve. So you kind of like, so it was, we were able to get involved, but it was mostly handled third party.
And my glory days were actually the first few days of working in user testing at Microsoft, where there was, you know, unlimited budget. And I basically, they each of us user researchers, they assigned us like 6 or 8 games, but we knew some of them were vapor, or some of them were clients that weren't necessarily interested. But Big Huge Games was super interested in this process. And so when you talk about the iterative process and why they probably hired me afterwards, I remember sending my first report, and Brian Reynolds, so I was like new to the industry and stuff like that, but I've heard of Brian Reynolds before, and like you respond, it's a templated report and you have your little issues written out and your severity and your game facet, and you fire it over the wall and you hope someone maybe reads it, right?
Yep.
And he actually went into the document and like added another column to it and said, yep, implemented already. Yeah, I did that this morning. Yep, we'll do this. Yep, I teamed it off to artists. They'll do the new thing. We'll do that. It's like, I think we're done now. And I'm like, oh, this is how usability could work. Okay. And we ended up actually, Mike's nodding his head because he was at Big Huge Games on the other side then. They were in Baltimore, I was in Seattle. They sent the 4 founders out to Microsoft. Well, 3 of them. Dave, who's my partner now at UX is Fine, he didn't always go, but the 3 other founding partners would go out for a week at a time, and we would camp them out in the usability lab for 5 straight days of iterative user testing. So we would be fixing issues in between and rebuilding. The folks back in Baltimore, poor folks that they were, they got moved onto West Coast time, and they could queue up action, like work items for them. So they would be back in Baltimore. Oh, shoot, we need a new icon or whatever. Like, oh, this mission is way too difficult. They need to like totally rebalance it or whatever. And then we do a play test at the end of the week to get sort of the more subjective survey measures. And that was like, big budget. They spent 5 weeks out doing on-site usability testing iteratively, and that was fantastic. Most of my client work when I was on this sort of, they got to pay me themselves. It's much less than that. It's much more crimes of attack, of opportunity. Sorry. It's, fitting in where you can next to milestones that are immovable. There's a lot of that sort of stuff. And as a user researcher, that's obviously, super frustrating. You learn how to make the most of those opportunities, right? And as they come to trust you more, you get them to sort of like, let's just make a few extra fixes because we're not going to get a second chance at this, and we don't need to be paying money to see these 5 issues like over and over again. And so, building the credibility with the team, if you can do one, hopefully you can excite them enough to do the next one. But really it's the foot in the door technique. Like, it's, unless they're totally bought in, they're not usually willing to, because that's the thing. It's like, it might cost you $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to do a test. But that's nothing compared to the money spent on the action items that need to then be done after the test. And then if you want to do the test right, you need to have them prepare for a week to get everything ready for the test so you can test the things you really want to test. And it really requires a radical shift in the way you think about like development cost and process and stuff like that. But once you run through it and then you see the tail end response, then you're like, oh yeah, it's worth investing at the front.
100%. The cool thing about back in the day, Big Huge Games, was we had a culture there that we would do play tests at lunch every day, and you were required, you had to sign up, and you were required, if it was your day for lunch, to be there and to play test. And so it was cool, like as an artist, like if you did something, you got it in the game, you're like, oh, I want to sign up this week because I want to see my little arquebus or my little cannon guy like walk around and see if all the animations are working right. But I think it opened us up to, because when we did the user test at Microsoft, I remember all the guys just like crowded around the TV, like watching like these people, like they had this sheet of things they had to do and they weren't doing it. And we're like, why aren't they pushing that button? Like, what's going on? So it was great. And I think, right. And I think if you can, I remember working at smaller studios here in Austin. Like I would just take the game home, and I was working on a American Ninja Warrior game, and I took the game home and like would let my kids and kids' friends play it and like just sit back and just watch them without saying anything. And I think, however you can plug in that, even if it's internal, however you can get that, it's so informative to get that experience. I mean, it's better, like Jason said, if you can find these problems early and do it in a very like specific and specialized and very regimented way. But if you can, however you can cheat to get some user testing done, it's definitely worth it.
All right, Delaney, you're up.
Hey y'all, thanks for taking questions. I'm interested in things from a development side, like like controller mechanics, haptic feedback, and things like that. And I was just wondering how much of that comes from UX teams as opposed to developers themselves.
Not enough.
It's interesting. We were working with Peter Molyneux's studio. They did the Fable, and I mean, obviously Peter Molyneux's done stuff, but they had this like Skunkworks project with Microsoft too at the time. It was a caveman game. It was never very good. And this is back on the original Xbox, and they had instead of the shoulder triggers and the shoulder buttons and the triggers, they replaced them with those black and white buttons that were really awkwardly positioned. I don't know how many of you remember the original Xbox controller. It was a terrible idea. And basically, I'd just gotten through debriefing the team. It's like, you can't map anything important to those buttons. Just consider them dead buttons. Like, don't ever. And so, and they're like, oh yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And then like, I don't know what it was, but some press junket that they were on, they're like, oh yeah, it's awesome. Then you press like white button to throw a coconut and black button to like, pick up an axe. I'm like, what? Like, did you not listen to a single thing I said? And so, yeah, we try to help them out. And there are, like Alison mentioned, task analysis, but also like there's things about like there's specifically things that you want to use, the different buttons, where they sit, where your hands are, also whether they're analog or digital, there's definitely different types of considerations you want to have. As far as haptics goes, I can't remember his name right now, but he's like the master of screen shake and controller rumble, like on fight games. And so like he would, in his heyday, he consulted with Big Huge Games. Mike, I can't remember if you were there or not on the, but like yeah, he goes into the very micro details of like how much screen shake you should use, and then how you should use the haptics of the vibration in the controller to really emphasize user feedback, not just make it feel good, but also user feedback in terms of like, did that really connect? Is it a nice meaty, or was it deflected or blocked or whatever?
Yeah, I would say that usually there's a camera designer on pretty big games, and they are the ones that will do the camera shakes like Jason was just saying, and they'll do the haptic feedback. Controller mapping is usually a combination of UX people and the game designers who are the combat designers. Well, depending on what type of game it is, but if there is combat, I have been able to say, this is what we're seeing when we test with it. I would recommend, like Melee only go to one button, and maybe it's like a press and a hold. But because of accessibility reasons, I think we need to have controllers be pretty much remappable for every piece of the controller anyway. So it's like you can have a specific default, but to be honest, people are going to change it. So I wouldn't be too married to whatever controls you do map it to.
And Alison, that's an awesome point when working with your developers, is working, especially when you're working them pre-production and stuff like that, and training them obviously for the next project, but that there's no reason why all this stuff shouldn't be adaptable on the fly, right? Like just through, like you yourself could muck around with the mappings and play with them or whatever. And so and building that is better for the default experience, but it's also better for building accessibility too. Like there's so many things you get. That's a really good point, Alison.
Yeah, our programmers would usually put like CVARs that have at least like 10 different control schemes. So if you preferred Halo circa 2004, I'm sure we have a control scheme for you.
That's how we saved Crimson Sky's High Road to Revenge, actually. We had to finally break them out of they hard-coded all the little measures for the controllers, and it was impossible to fly the plane. It wasn't fun at all. We're just like, just please break them out. We can like rapidly get through this, and like, seriously, in a week, we'll fix the plane controls. Yeah.
All right, moving on. Ronnie Moon. Still with us, Ronnie.
You're not muted, but we can't hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Can I test? Can you?
Yep. Getting there.
Okay. Let me see. All right. I just want to make sure I'm not feeding back, creating any kind of a noise loop or anything. All right. You can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I have a couple questions for each speaker, so I'm just going to kind of try to fire them off. So each speaker, if you can remember the question that's for you, I'm going to do it before anybody can stop me, and then you guys can just start speaking freeform. So for Jason, I had seen in your slides something about IA and IXD, and you had talked about the core loop, and I was wondering if you could talk more about those concepts specifically. And for Alison, could you maybe try to go more in depth or break down that slide called What the Real Process Looks Like? And about some things I had seen called journey analysis and competitive analysis and task analysis, as Jason had mentioned. And for Smitty, good to see you again, Smitty. I can vouch for Smitty. He's a great UI UX designer. And I just want to ask you, so right now I've moved to a position where I'm sort of the sole Unity developer. I'm the Unity guy at a very small team doing casino style software. And so I was wondering if you could give me some tips on where to learn more specifically about casino gaming UI. I went out to Las Vegas. I went to Global Games Expo, and I saw that first slide you had. It looks very much like all the Las Vegas casino style UI. So if you have any tips on like resources to learn more about that style and the psychology of casino style games, and talk more about what you'd mentioned about patterns and forms in your process. And you'd mentioned button colors, which I've heard kind of as a meme. If you could maybe just even talk about that for a second. And there's a lot of just technical stuff. You had mentioned like Balsamic and Miro and Acture and things that I don't really know about. So if you could talk about that. So if you all, whenever you want to go ahead.
Do you want to go in order? Yeah.
Jason,
Does that mean I'm first? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, I'm just calling up the slide here. I won't share it, but I've given this slide before. I can share the slides after. So in terms of like the terms IA and IXD, IA is information architecture, refers to information architecture, and so that's the idea that you have a sense based on usually the way I break it down is on every screen, you'll want to know, where am I, what do I need to know to make a decision, and then, what are my decisions that I can make, and then you'll want to have them organized in some sort of hierarchy that it's easy to parse, easy to know. Oftentimes for these types of games, like mobile games and stuff like that, like there's a lot of screens where you don't want to have the player stop at all. You want them to just keep going through it and have, really clear default actions, but then have other things that are not quite so primary or attracting their attention, that they might want to get into for other user stories that they might be trying to solve for. And so information architecture is at least to me, is how they did. Now, I have a follow-up question for Alison as well, because the interesting thing is that I was never formally trained in a lot of this UX stuff. So I tend to often confuse other UX folks because sometimes I use some of the terminology incorrectly or whatever. But whenever I think of information architecture, that's what I think about. And IXD refers to interaction design, generally speaking. And I don't know how to really define that other than, kind of like maybe thinking of it as like a state machine, like what happens when certain inputs are done, you expect to see some sort of feedback to let you know that your input has been received, to confirm that you made the input that you thought you did, and then it then completes the handshake and takes you to whatever state you need to be in. But again, that is just like literally that slide is just me carving out some stuff from other slides and popping it in there, because the way I think about things is so holistic, and I don't think about one sort of without the other. In terms of the core loop, that like in free to play, that's like the biggest thing in terms of like, how do we make sure like these people could leave at any time? And the key is that for a game to be healthy and sustainable, we need to have people going through that core loop of activities, because that means that they'll come back later for more sessions. They'll engage in things that we know are related to monetization and retention. And so basically there's a series of play, get feedback, invest more into the game, and then play some more, that we need people going through those core loops. And then you have all sorts of supporting loops that help people get more and more invested as they go on. But generally speaking, a key part of the early experience for the user is like get them into the core loop so they can understand what that is, do that over and over again, and then you layer on other systems and features to support longer term engagement, monetization on top of that core loop. That's the way I think about it.
Alison?
All right. So I'll start by prefacing that UX design, I think, in other industries, aside from games, is all about removing as much friction as possible so that the user can get to the end of the process as soon and as quickly as possible, without churning out of the process. So like when I was designing websites and I did e-commerce things or shopping carts, like it's very, very important that it's only a couple of clicks away so that the person is more likely to complete their purchase as opposed to, having to create a new account to be able to sign in, to be able to get into the shopping cart. And then you have to do your credit card validation. But then there's another step, like every step in UX design for that's a point where the customer could leave and you could lose a sale. And so in games, it's very different because game designers are intentionally creating friction for you to have a challenge, for you to want to overcome it, and for you to be engaged and to continue to gain a skill at a particular game. And so when UX design started to come into game design, those two things did not overlap very well, and people didn't adjust to either sense of it, right? And so UX design ended up being kind of like, oh, you just create wireframe boxes and you're kind of a UI designer, but you don't do the art. So I'm not quite sure where to put you. So what UX design in games has had to start to do is a lot of assisting game designers and being a pair designer with them. If you've never looked up what pair design strategies are, I highly recommend doing that. So what I have done in the past when I've been integrated into a new team is take game designers that have been, mirrored in their traditional senses of what they need to do to create things and make them do a workshop. This is what is in my background. This is a workshop that I run before. It is called a user journey by Adaptive Path. That is the methodology that they have created, and you can actually do workshops with Adaptive Path and get certification through it. But it is, you take the persona, so you take one of your motivations, one of your people, and you assume them, and you figure out what they're thinking, feeling, doing at different stages. And so I typically like to take designers, think of one feature that they're thinking of, and make them go through the exercise of the perspective of 3 different types of people. So it could be like, I am very much a community focused person. I very much like social connections. This is why I play MMOs. This is why I have been playing Warframe for so long. It's because there's a big dojo and I can go and be with a whole bunch of people in my dojo. So it's like assuming that persona, what would I want, upon first login? Do I want something that is telling me, hey, 15 of your clan members are online right now. Do you want to go group up with them to be able to go into this, raid? It's kind of like a SWOT analysis, if you've ever heard of that before, but it's for the actual user journey to understand where the emotional high points are and where there are opportunities for you to insert not only good UX, but good game design as well. And so you have to do this really terrible balancing act because it's so easy to fuck up. I'm just being serious here, where UX has to provide the right amount of information to get you to where you're going so that you can surmount that challenge within the game. There's a very good theory called progressive disclosure that I would recommend you looking into. Jacob Nielsen does a lot of heuristics about this, where it is revealing the right amount of information over time so that players do not get cognitively overloaded and they have what they're able to do to maintain immersion in the game and still be able to have fun and know what they're doing.
All right, Michael Smith, if you don't start talking, Dr. Cat is going to steal all your best material.
Okay.
He'll up and
So-
chat. I'll plug him later. Go ahead.
I got my list. So the first thing you asked, I want to learn more about slots, right? So there's a great website, and it's a service we actually use called Liquid and Grit. And they have basically competitive analysis. They have reports they give out based on features that people launch. and they have like a data. Yep, there you go. They have like a database with like videos of how some slot games are doing of first-time user experience for TUIs, and how they're running their collections, feature. And so you can get a lot of stuff from that in just terms of like what people are doing and what's successful. They pay a subscription for me. I don't know how expensive it is. That's just
they give a bunch of free stuff out. Yeah, no, it's true. They give free stuff out, but it's you pay for it.
And I'll go into software later. In terms of like patterns and forms. So patterns, so a lot of that, what Alison was talking about, like cognitive load and stuff like that, like, 7 things, like, so you definitely want, clear call to actions, right? Because that reduces cognitive load. That reduces me trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do on the screen. And so always having a button that moves you forward on the right side of the screen, because we read left to right, is a pattern, right? If I'm going backwards or I'm closing out, a pattern would be to put a button on the left side of the screen. But we as a society have, if we're PC users, which a lot of the older generation grew up using PCs, are used to close buttons having a X button on the right upper corner of the screen. And so a lot of times you have to decide in your app, or you have to decide a pattern would be, am I using a close button? Am I using the back button? And you have to be consistent about when you use it and why you use it. And that's part of a pattern, and that's creating an expectable outcome for the user. And you have to be consistent. So for me, a lot of the stuff that I do is about maintaining these consistencies, right? So like I go in and I try to make sure when we're working on something that we're being consistent with how we approach the feature. Like the feature could be brand new, but we want, we want the user to, we want to be able to, for the user when he gets in, they say, oh, that reward box, I'm familiar with that. It's giving me coins, right? Like I don't have to look, like that's something that I'm used to. This button, or this button that's leading here, like I'm used to this. I'm used to this little info button. If I click that, I know I'm going to see a video, or I'm going to see, so that's what I mean by patterns and forms, right? And so having buttons the same size, if you don't use round buttons and square buttons, you want to have, you want things to look like buttons to always look like buttons. You don't want, if you have things that like, I've never seen a round button before. Like, is that a button or is that an icon? Like, what is that? Like, I don't know. Like, so that's just, that's what I mean by consistent patterns and forms. In terms of software, so depending on if you're using a PC or a Mac, there are tons of software that UI, UX makes it super accessible and easy to use. Like, so XD, they have a lot of pre-generated buttons and drop downs and like wireframing things. So if you're not good at generating art, you can use Adobe XD and then use their templates to help you do that. Sketch, for which if you're using a Mac, is also a software that has a lot of pre-generated items that you can use. And a lot of these softwares have very simple, easy to use systems that let you plug things up and do click-through prototypes. Envision is a web-based software that's really good. Axure, it's a little more complicated. and that's a software. Like, so I would look at Envision. We currently just switched to using Miro, which is, so Envision and Miro. Envision is a web-based software that lets you do prototyping, but the power of Envision and the power of Miro, M-I-R-O, is that it's easy to whiteboard in this age of Zoom with tons of people in different places. And it's a living document that that updates automatically. And so you can just throw up images or videos or links on the Miro board, and people, and you can see the people's little arrows flying around, and they can add notes to what you're doing. And so it's a great tool, not only to document any flows, but also just a good place, like a one-stop like place to hold the knowledge for that feature or for that that element of the game that you're working on, as opposed to, I got Google Slides here, I got like a Word document somewhere on the server here, like there's a PDF of something over there, like you can keep it all in one spot, which is always a good practice.
We have a game dev grognard in our chat here, the one known as Dr. Cat, that done early work for what is now, it was Multimedia Games, and it's now Every, and he gave some good ideas that, just to summarize, again, casino UI stuff. Don't use text controls that nearsighted people or people who are retirement age, squinting at small screens, have trouble seeing. Blue color schemes work well, but red and gold also has some cultural relevance to Asians and also attracts well with Westerners. And use female characters because they will have appeal to anyone playing. But going on with what Smitty was saying, making sure the symbols can be seen and mentally parsed. If you have anything spinning, like in a slots game, make sure that it actually looks like something instead of just a blur, because that's what provides anticipation and excitement, so you look forward to what happens when it stops. We still have time. We'll keep going to the questions. Claire Rice. Thanks everyone for waiting.
Hello. So I am a user interface artist. I know Alison.
Yeah,
so that's cool.
Hi, Claire.
Hi. I work at Every, and I'm like I guess I work primarily in porting games, porting mobile slots games, but that's all front end. So I do that. I do porting, but that also involves a lot of like implementing and making tools for artists to, like I'm working on a video template. I'm constantly refining that to help artists make games, but I don't focus so much on a player anymore. So I was basically wondering what you guys did to train yourselves outside of work, like when you were in those transitional periods, to understand UX more, because I am primarily in UI. And you're offering all these tools right now that are great. All I have is like this book right here that I just started. It's like
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a classic one. But and there's also that website that was posted, the interaction design website. But yeah, if you could offer any insight. I know that's a really broad question, but if you could offer any insight, what helped you most?
Good starting points. I mean, like Celia Hoden's book, if you want to just type in celiahoden.com in there or whatever. I used to, like, when she came out from Epic and started doing all sorts of stuff, I was like, oh my goodness, there's competition. I'm going to lose my... She's awesome, first of all. Second of all, super smart. Third of all, wrote an amazing book. It's called The Gamer's Brain. No, Gamer's Brain?
The Gamer's Brain.
The Gamer's Brain. Definitely pick it up. Go to her website. I mean, if you're not sure, like, should I spend the money on the book or not or whatever, go to her website. She offers a lot of content there for free already. And then go to GDC, like how John said at the beginning, go to GDC Game Vault. There are a lot of UX talks up there that are really good. And just search for UX, just like in the search bar there, UX, and you'll come up with like bang, 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 like really good talks given by great speakers. Like they're really compelling. And that, like, definitely, I'll also post a link to there's Slack groups, Discord groups of various different activities. I'll post a link to that there. I just sort of maintain one. But Celia has one on her site too, and I think she's going to add some of the ones that I had it on my site to her site. So I'll post that. Sorry, I jumped in there.
No, you're okay. I was going to say, if you're trying to go more into UX design and not like UX research, I would suggest doing case studies of things in the industry that you want to go into. So for instance, if you did want to do, like big role-playing narrative games, okay, you could do a case study on The Last of Us 2 and go through and analyze it, do competitive analysis, which is a part of UX design, where you start breaking down where things don't work, where are the points of inappropriate friction, like I was talking about earlier, and where could things be more streamlined? Are the controllers very difficult to understand or follow? Are there things that we aren't thinking about for accessibility reasons? Like maybe we should have sound indicators for the clickers in The Last of Us so that people who are hard of hearing could understand where the enemy is going to be a little bit more. So if you create those case studies where you can outline, where you think the problem areas are, do an analysis of a game, and then have your suggestions on how to improve it. Those are the sorts of things that I look for in portfolios, is your ability to kind of analyze something and say, okay, well, this got us to like 60%. What can we do to improve it to get it to like a 75%, to an 80%? Because a lot of times it's just very small tweaks that we have to do that makes something more successful. So the more case studies that you can do like that, and to train your brain kind of in this analytical way that can also combine with the creative, I think is going to help you out in the long run.
I would also add so I have to do a lot of technical stuff as well in Unity. And so from a more functional, like UI, if you're going on a more UI interaction sort of bent, first off, like what you're doing now, the consumer is the artist that you're making tools for. So, use that as a platform to figure out, like Alison said earlier, like how to reduce the friction in what they're trying to do. And part of that is doing good UX, good UI, right? Not only that, so there's a bunch of like Coursera, LinkedIn Learning. I think Stanford at one point was offering like a free UX course online, but there's definitely a lot of places where you can get just some, to shore up sort of like what are good best practices and what are good methodologies to help you think through a problem. But for me, I also like lean on, like, there's a bunch of like websites that have like UI patterns and for like, like Nielsen is a great website that has like data on just like everything from like microwaves to they have a great game PDF that they put out every year on how people are what games they're playing, what a lot of data and stuff like that, and how they're playing it, and how they're using their phones and stuff like that. So I mean, just from stuff of like how do people hold their phones when they talk. There's a ton you could of information that you can use, but I mean, I would start from where you are and just try to make your experiences with your tools the best you can, and then build on that, and then from an experience standpoint, and then just get used to like there's best practices, and there's a reason why things work. And like I think people were pointing it out in the chats, like why you use certain colors and why you don't, and why you button sizes are always 80 pixels or larger, what size fonts, like just stuff like that. Like there's things to know to help you become a better designer, and a lot of those from a visual artistic standpoint, and a lot of those things are based in good user experience practices.
Okay, Susan Meredith, I've spoken to you before. You have a game concept that is in the tabletop version about financial literacy. and you've been wanting to know what your next steps are and how to make something presentable to maybe financial investors or getting a Kickstarter ready. Is that correct?
Yeah, I finally came back to it, and it's made a lot of progress. And it's but I'm not from the gaming world, so you're talking about a lot of things I'm not even clear what they are. But that's okay. I don't need to because you guys all know that stuff. But yeah, it's I'm pleased with the Flatiron School just did a UI UX study for me on it and took it in a different direction. It was really good, and one of their guys is working with me on it. But there's a lot more to it. You know, there needs to be the whole platform. The engine needs to be converted to, I guess, Unity is what I've been told is the right thing. And I actually had somebody start working with it on Unity. So I'm really looking at, okay, now what? You know, this is ready to go. I'm talking to some school people about it for education. It's time for it to get done. So anyway, I don't know. Who do I need? I have a UI UX guy that just finished a program, but he's, you know, and we talked about it. I mean, he's very good, led their team, but he's new to that world and is willing to run the project, which is amazing, but it's probably, you know, as said, he's probably not the right person to do that. And programming it, you know, the Excel version works great. You can get 3,000 points on it, you know, in 20 rounds playing the game correctly. And so it's just a matter of, from the engine standpoint, but, you know, the whole leaderboard and all the things you talked about a little bit, you know, that's not started at all. And so, yeah, that's why I came on here. It's like, well, you guys probably know.
Yeah.
Where to go from here? So.
I just jammed. I don't know how to. I suck at Discord, so I don't know how to do like a link to it. But I know there's got to be some ATX Game Maker Discord folks on here. It's a neat little group of folks, some of whom are business focused and others. But this, like, I'm not the person definitely to give you advice on how to make your game, but there are folks on that group as well. I don't know if other folks here want to chime in on that sort of thing, but they definitely have folks in that group who'd be open to those sorts of discussions and chatting with you about that. And they try to, you know, meet up and talk about game dev. And so it looks like John just put the link to the Discord chat in there as well.
Yeah, I'm copying some of
good
the stuff
feedback
down.
there. Yeah.
NSF grant would be wonderful. I'm sure that would be, yeah.
Also, Unity, the store, like they have a community as well. Like, so if you do port your game to Unity, they have a community where you can reach out to people who are just doing freelance, and they might, like, not only is it a good place to find some freelance work, but it's also a good place to just buy a leaderboard. Like, you could just go in there and they probably have like leaderboards or certain screens or inventory screens or whatever already done, and you can import that into your project. So I definitely would look at their community site as a resource.
I got one more for you. If you like Reddit, Game Dev Classifieds is another really good one. People are posting stuff there all the time. It's kind of a crapshoot, like the classified section of a real newspaper or Craigslist. But again, I just think you just need to get more people aware of your project and see where it can go from there. Every little bit of insight and perspective you can get is what you need. So in quantity as well as quality, and start with quantity and then you'll get quality later.
Also, I don't know if they still have local people here, but Mind Blown Labs, they make financial literacy games for mobile and web. And I know
Mind Blown, did you say?
Yeah, Mind Blown Labs. Mike did a small little job for them, and I did a couple little things for them, but they do financial literacy games. So they might just, as a, you know, someone who's like, you know, gone through the process of building these types of games and stuff, they might be interested in that.
Retirement planning games.
Yeah, basically, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, this is way beyond that. Make your financial mistakes here so you don't have to in the real world. That's my plus one. It has all income, expenses, assets, liabilities, investments, all hitting you at once, and it's cool. It works. So anyway.
Thank you, Susan. Lisa Poon has been waiting for her call. We're at the 9-hour mark, so I'm just pushing a little bit faster here. Lisa,
Hello.
with us?
Yes, I just have a really quick question. In gaming companies, do you see that companies look for either interns or employers that they look for people that have experiences that can do everything to every hat? Like from listening to Alison, I noticed she basically can do every hat from what I see. I'm a UX designer, and I am looking for a job in the UX design space. I'm actually career pivoting. So long story short, I'm coming from finance and into UX design and tech space. And so I was just curious if companies like game companies look for UXers that can do multiple hats.
Oh, totally. 100%. Like the more that you can do, the more that they see you as a valuable business asset. And like I was saying earlier, it really depends on the studio that you go to, what responsibilities you'll have. Like when I was at EA and we had our own user research lab, I didn't have to do user research, but I would take that information and then put it into designs, and I would be the one that runs with it on the game, because they were kind of like a centralized entity that helped out with a whole bunch of games. So if you want to be able to wear a bunch of different hats and have a bunch of different challenges, then I would advise going smaller, more independent studios that might not have a lot of UI resources. It does mean that you'll probably have to fight for them a lot. That has been my experience from, fighting for UX being understood in what it does, what it doesn't do, and that it's not like a Hail Mary for every single problem that your game might have. And you'll have to fight for budget in case you want to ever do external testing. But if you have that sort of gumption, then you can completely do every single aspect of the process if you want to.
And I would think so some companies, they like the titles, so we're still trying to get titles right. So there's there's UX, there's UI, and then there's project management, PMs, right? So a lot of times user research, if you want to do, if your current skill set is user research or user market research, or more the, I'm more interested in this game is failing because of X. So I'm interested in digging into what that problem is and how I can fix it and trying to come up with a solution or feature that would fix that. That's UX, but it could also be project management. So project management, so PMs. So you might want to just look for entry-level jobs in that field. If you are more of an artist and you're doing more art, you might want to go into just straight UI or interaction design and look for positions that are solely around art. Because some companies say, I'm technically, I've worked at places where I was a UX artist, but I really was just a UI artist, or where I did a bit of both or did all of it, or I only did UX. So you kind of have to look at the job listing and just kind of do some soul searching on what you really want to do, and just try to get your feet in however you can. There's a lot of programs where they're offering entry level sort of you can go in as a entry level designer or PM, and they have programs that they'll teach you sort of the things you need to know. But try a couple different avenues.
I know a few things about this because I organize events, or I did before the time of the plague. Honestly, the thing that people won't talk about directly, but it's always implied, is that the game industry worries more about crazy than they do lack of ability. And if you can present yourself as a reasonably, you need to be a little bit crazy to want to do this for a living, but you need to not be malignant crazy, like as in don't be cancer. You know, be benign crazy. Be the person that can work within a team and you don't screw up their, you know, precarious interpersonal balance just by being there. And if you find a way to present yourself that way, and really there is no substitute for just both hands. Like in one hand, you got everything you know and can demonstrate, and the other hand is who knows you. This is hard for shy people, but you can offset it by just presenting yourself out as much as possible. So you did the right thing by coming to this event and speaking up. And maybe some people will be able to connect with you either through the meetup page or through our chat channel. So thanks everyone for coming out for doing that. And we are actually past the normal time when we would be shutting things down. We had upwards of 46 people. A few people have said goodnight to us, but are there any other questions for our speakers before we start to say goodnight to everyone? I did want to acknowledge Gordon Walton finally managed to get here. He, like I said, his game went beta, so he's been focused on that, which is probably the proper thing for him to be focused on. But what's great is that everyone's giving each other really good ideas. And that's the thing about knowledge, is that we don't really know everything. You know, definitely no one knows everything, but we can't really transfer knowledge all that well. All we really got are these little bits and pieces we call our perspective and our insight. And really that can go a long way, especially if you're inspired enough to go the extra mile and figure out what's relevant for yourself. And that's part of why I like the idea of our speakers telling personal stories, because again, how much could we make use of the time we're allotted? So we don't have time for the 30,000 foot view of reality here. That'd just take too long. So let's just bring it down to earth and make it personal and remind ourselves that we are in fact human beings. Oftentimes it can easy to forget such things, but it's absolutely necessary that we remind ourselves. But with that, I guess we'll thanks to our speakers, Allison, Smitty, Jason, thank you all. And everyone be safe when you have to go outside, wear your damn masks. It's for everyone's sake, not just your own. And keep a watch on the VGMU meetup page. We'll have the next one about voice acting. Second week of Thursday, as always, it'll be, was it the 8th of October will be the next one. And we do have one for December the 10th. We just need to announce it. And everyone, stay in touch and be safe. And good night.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Alison and Mike. That was great.
Oh, thank you.